Good morning, everyone. We can go to the next slide and go through our agenda. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start with welcome and introductions. Then we'll talk about grant administration, go into some guided discussions on programs and study components. We'll have a short break, and then we're going to do a little something different today. We'll do some resources and professional development trivia on Cohort. Then we'll break for lunch, and after lunch, we'll be joined by OCCRL for some training or professional development around the CLNA. And then we'll wrap up and adjourn for the day. Okay, so again, I'm Janelle Jones, Director for Career and Technical Education at ICCB.
And I'm Ann Story, Associate Director for Career and Technical Education at ICCB.
So we have half of our crew here today. Our Senior Director, Tasha Allen, is out. And so is Deja Luckett, one of our Associate Directors for Career and Technical Education. I just want to welcome everyone to the Fall PAC meeting as a pre-conference to the Forum for Excellence. We were really looking forward to seeing everyone in person, but I mean, of course, our health and well-being comes first. And so thankful that we're able to pivot and meet everyone on this virtual platform again. So happy to see everyone. If you haven't already, make sure you introduce yourselves in the chat. So yeah, we're still looking forward to a meaningful experience for everyone on this virtual platform. With that, I'll turn it over to Ann for grant administration.
Good morning. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about grant administration, reporting, and monitoring. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so as many of you are aware, grant recipients were to complete an institutional assessment, the Internal Controls Questionnaire, also known as the ICQ, as well as a grant-specific programmatic risk assessment. So what we do with these assessments is we use them to determine your risk level. So when you fill out the ICQ for risk conditions, that affects all the grants at an institution. When you do your grant-specific programmatic assessment, we're looking at your individual grants, specifically your Perkins grants. And so it's important to remember that there are different types of risk conditions that your institution can have. You can have fiscal or programmatic risk conditions, or you can have fiscal and programmatic risk conditions. You can have none of the above. You can have neither fiscal nor programmatic risk conditions. For FY22, we're happy to say that all colleges are programmatically low risk. However, some institutions do still have the fiscal risk conditions. These conditions were relayed in your Perkins Notice of State Award and also in your Uniform Grant Agreements. Next slide. Okay, so as many of you know, we do monitor your grants, and we wanted to take a minute to kind of review how we determine whether or not you're going to be monitored for a fiscal year. So when we determine monitoring, we use a risk-based assessment, and our risk-based assessment determines if your institution, if a grantee falls within the top 20% of all ICCB grantees. So when we calculate risk, we are looking at both your fiscal and your programmatic factors. And they include things like unspent funds, whether or not you submit your budget modifications or your quarterly reports on time. We look at the experience of your relevant leadership. So we look at how long your grant administrator has been in the role. We look to see if you received any type of compliance findings in a previous monitoring session. We look to see whether or not you need significant technical assistance. We look at whether or not you had any unallowable expenditures. And then finally, we also consider how long it has been since your last fiscal monitoring. We also want to note that you do not receive a joint programmatic and fiscal report anymore, and they will be separate as they were in years past. Next slide. as far as what grants we're going to monitor, our risk-based monitoring system applies to all the grants you receive through our institution, through ICCB. So your ICCB CTE liaison will be monitoring the previous year's Perkins basic grant, as well as any Perkins Title I leadership grants your institution received during the fiscal year that you are currently being monitored. So our current monitoring is we are looking at we're conducting FY 2021 monitoring, and we're looking at your FY 2020 grants. All of your Title I leadership grants will be monitored in accordance with like their respective scope, the assessments, and the deliverable outcomes. We are going to request certain information from you, and that could include any of your budgetary and reporting items, any applicable performance outcomes, any required grant deliverable outcomes, and any supplemental documentation that we feel might be specific to the grant and or the grantee. So monitoring procedures. So the grant, when we look at your review, we're looking at the institutional risk score that was in the top 20% of all ICCB grantees. If for some reason you were designated as an elevated risk, then you are going to undergo a monitoring visit from ICCB fiscal and program staff. And we're going to take a look and review all of the grants that were awarded to you by ICCB during the applicable monitoring period. So you will be required as a grantee to complete a self-assessment portion of the monitoring tool and submit relevant documentation specific to that documentation checklist. And then at the end of the visit, you will receive a formal monitoring report. So your CTE liaison will send you an email to schedule the monitoring visit and attach the appropriate documents that we need you to complete and then send back to us so we can review for your visit. For targeted technical assistance, your institutional risk score was not in the top 20% of all ICCB grantees. Grantees will receive targeted technical assistance via a desk review or a phone conference, and that's as it relates to all the grants awarded by ICCB. We no longer are going to have a moderate or low risk level. And for this targeted technical assistance, you won't receive a formal monitoring report. Okay, so reporting, as many of you know, you have to submit programmatic and financial reports 30 days after the end of a quarter, and this is based on Edgar. Your programmatic reporting is located within your annual work plan template, and the financial reporting is located on a separate spreadsheet. Both of them you send to the ICCB CTE mailbox, and we've included the email address on there in case you don't have it. And we've also included the schedule. So each year you're submitting reports for Q1 on October 30th, for Q2 on January 30th, for Q3 on April 30th, and then Q4 and your final report are due by July 30th. All right, so budget modifications. As many of you know, you are allowed to make modifications on your own up to 10% or $1,000, whichever is higher. And you can do this without seeking a prior approval from us at ICCB. However, if you have a modification that's greater than 10% or $1,000, whichever is higher, and that's of any specific line, or if you require a major change in scope, then you have to submit a budget modification request to, right now, your CTE liaison. So it's important to remember the template for your budget modification is the last tab of the uniform budget. And it includes line item specifics as well as programmatic explanation of the changes. And just a few formatting things as you complete your budget modification. You want to make sure that not only do you correct the amount on the budget modification tab, we also ask that you go back to all the individual tabs that you've modified and make sure that that total or that tab aligns with the approved modifications. Update any narratives that you've included. Make sure that you fill in your institution name and the date you're submitting the modification. And then the form, along with the revised uniform budget, gets sent to the CTE ICCB mailbox. All modifications must be submitted no later than May 30th, 2022 for approval. Next slide. Okay, so your payment requests.
And if I could pause there for just a second.
Mhm.
We do have a question in the chat.
Sure.
The first question is, can you go, the email there, can you go over the 3 different emails that we're going through?
Yes. Okay, so we do have, and this does get a little bit confusing. If you're looking for payment requests, those do go to a separate email, and that's for fiscal. That's what the ICCB.grant payments email address is for. Any type of, if you're requesting money or payment, needs to be sent to that email address. And then the CTE inbox is the one that Janelle, Deja, and I check on a regular basis for any CTE related questions, like budget modifications, like quarterly reports. If you're submitting a budget modification, you can also, CC your CTE liaison, and then it will go to both inboxes, your liaisons and the CTE inbox. And was there another email address that someone had a question about?
They just wanted clarification on the 2. And then the question is, another question, so that you can answer the email one. Thank you so much. The other question is, what will be due for Q1 if the college has not received their allocation for this year?
Oh, that's a good question. Janelle, do you know?
Everyone should have received, so you know your allocations. We know not everyone has received their uniform grant agreements yet, but fiscal is working on them, and you can and should be expending funds for for your grant. So any activities that have taken place, you still need to submit your quarter 1 report. If you haven't expended any funds, then you just note that. If you haven't, conducting any activities, you can just note that as well, but we'll still need the report.
Excellent, thank you. And then there was a question about the slide deck, and yes, we will make that available with the recording following the PAC meeting today. So with the forum being the next 2 days, give us at least till Monday, but you will be getting the slides as well as the presentations and all of that great stuff. Thank you. Anne, didn't mean to interrupt, but we did have some questions.
No, that's okay. No, happy to answer questions. I know it gets a little confusing with all the different email addresses, but we just want to make sure that your materials are getting to the right person in a timely manner. Okay, so payment requests. Federal funds have to be requested using the request for payment form provided by the board. Vouchers are processed upon submission of the grantee's request for payment form, and that is sent with the uniform grant agreement. So I know, those are still being worked on, so you should be receiving those soon if you haven't. There's no limit to the number of payment requests that can be submitted during the fiscal year. And your final payment requests are due to ICCB by August 1st of each year. And again, the payment request email address is listed below. It's that ICCB grant payments email address. Amy, did another question just come through?
Yes.
Okay.
If we have not received funds, is it because we did not submit the email to the ICCB grants payment email?
No, that shouldn't be like, we try to check the CTE inbox, and I know if they come to me, I forward them. So I don't think that's the case. Janelle, do you, unless it maybe is locked?
If you're referring to if you submitted a payment request and you haven't received reimbursement, it may just be because we've had turnover and fiscal is behind. So Alex Fuller no longer works. And I know some people were submitting payment requests as instructed directly to Alex. So he no longer works at the agency. So just make sure if you've already submitted a payment request and you have not received reimbursement, just go ahead and resubmit the request to this email address.
And so I'm sure you can see the one final question there. For reporting, review, and monitoring, if activities do not take place due to COVID, should we state that?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.